Romantic Killer is a rom-com anime released on Netflix in October 2022. Our protagonist Anzu is a girl in high school who only cares about chocolate, video games, and her cat. The show is basically about a girl who is blissfully happy with her life, completely unaware that a wizard is gonna come and mess it up. No, really. She buys a new video game, and that's where our story begins, kind of. Out of her TV screen pops out a wizard who has been sent to grant her a real-life dating sim game. I know this sounds cheesy, but bear with me, it's so good, I promise. This isn't what Anzu wants, but with a dodgy signed contract and deception aside, she's now forced into the life of a video game that she has bought. Also, her cat, chocolate, and video games, are taken away, as well as her parents. They're like sent abroad because of like her dad's job, even though he's technically a postman, all in the attempts to basically get her a boyfriend to stop the decrease in birth rates. Now, with these taken away, she has no choice but to focus on her love interests. Now, this video will obviously have spoilers, so just giving you a quick warning over here. If you haven't watched it, please do. It is a very, very good anime, I promise. But if you haven't watched it and you want spoilers, here you go. Personally, for me, the advert on Netflix was quite misleading because it seemed like she would be quite excited about her love interests, but then you watch the show and you realize how like miserable she is through most of it, which is kind of funny. But yeah, it was really, really funny about that. And part of what makes the show actually endearing is the fact that she is so relentless in fighting against Riri, just because this wizard took away her favorite things. Like, fair enough, but also like dedication, revenge. I'm here for it. While the majority of the show is Anzu beating up Riri many, many, many times, the message behind the show is the shallowness behind the romance tropes that Riri tries to set up between Anzu and her love interests, and that these tropes are ultimately meaningless without any deep bond that comes between two people communicating with each other and being vulnerable. So ultimately, this deep bond that the characters have created between each other is something that can't be earned through cliché romance tropes and dating simulations. Now, before I get into the love interest and all the characters real quick, I decided to look at a couple of reviews just because I wanted to see, what everyone else was thinking, what everyone else was up to. And while most of the reviews are quite positive, there were some that were negative. I don't know why I sound surprised, but I guess I am surprised by that because it's actually quite good. And they do bring up interesting points, but I ultimately don't completely agree with the points. For example, in one article, I think it's the butwhythough.net article, described most of the characters as hollow and two-dimensional due to the fast pace between each romantic comedy trope. And while the pace is quite fast, I don't completely disagree with that, the pace is very fast. But the romantic tropes themselves don't reduce the characters at all, but instead it reminds the viewer, so us, that these tropes are hollow and that real authentic people or characters do not act like that. The butwhynow.net article says that the characters aren't fully developed because of this fast pace, but I don't completely agree with that either, as characters like Tsukasa, who seem reserved and, gloomy, ultimately have a lot of anxiety underneath. So it shows that there's more to what the characters seem to be. And the whole Anzu not knowing what she wants, according to others, is somewhat true, but I personally saw it as more of her missing out on potential connections, whether they're platonic or romantic, because of her favorite things. Ultimately, gonna be brutally honest here, the girl never left the house. She always wanted to be home. She wanted her cat and she wanted her video games, and that was that. And if she still had those things, she would have not made the connections that she's made now. And these are beautiful connections, whether you actually ship her with those characters or not. I really like their bond, so I think it's a great thing that she has that. And she cares about them as well. It's not completely one-sided. Obviously the romance is very one-sided, especially on some of the characters, but for the most part, she cares about all of them. So I think that's beautiful. But yeah, despite the whole one-sided romance thing, I am ultimately rooting for Anzu over her love interest. I am rooting for her to just get whatever she desires. If that's those three things back, so be it, but hopefully she actually opens up more and makes more friends, because I think that would be nice. Right, the first love interest we're going to talk about is he's introduced as Kazuki. At first, Kazuki gives the impression of a popular bad boy, you know it all, hates women because he rejects them all, and he kind of like seems uncomfortable around girls. Our girl Anzu just tries to avoid him at all costs, but obviously Riri doesn't really help much with that. As Anzu gets to know him, shirt tucked in and all, she realizes that he's a lovely person. And in a situation which ends up with them having to live together, she learns that he's a great cook, that he can clean, and that he's hardworking. And she can't help but to feel guilty, as she's the reason that his life has become so messed up. Also, she thinks. The next love interest we're introduced to is Junta Hayami. With a knock on her front door, Anzu is flustered by his appearance and is under the belief that Riri has implanted false memories and feelings into him, as she literally does not remember him being her childhood best friend. He is a very likable, sweet guy who is head over heels for Anzu, and his crush is literally obvious to everyone around him, except he doesn't think it's obvious. And Anzu plays like the whole oblivious thing, and they're like, oh my god, how can you be oblivious? Like, you should know. But she's just sat there pretending, sweating. But he's just okay being in her life, even if she doesn't ever realize that he fancies her, which is actually really cute, but also very sad. The final love interest that Riri has in store for Anzu is Hiriji Kojane. And they met at Love at First Bump. Like the whole video game thing where, she's late for school and she's running and oh my god, there's a man, and they bump into each other, except it's a car. So she gets run over. She gets hit by a car. Love at first run over. It's crazy. And turns out loads of girls have been doing that to him in order to like get to him. Anyways, this love interest is the very rich and very hot and cold prince, and he is very used to getting his own way and people just constantly adoring him. But his attitude is very jarring to Anzu, which is fair. But as Anzu and him get to know each other, she relaxes around him, and while still attempting to avoid romance, obviously, she does have to save Momohiki after all. I have described most of the relevant characters up to this point. If there are new characters, I will bring them up, because there's a character that I'm thinking of right now, and she scares me a little because she's crazy, but she is not like super relevant. I mean, she is. But like, I don't really talk about her that much, so I just won't talk about her. Anyways, I've talked about most of the relevant characters up to this point, but one question still remains. What makes this show so different to other romance shows? Now we're gonna get on to the themes from the show that I've picked up on. Obviously there might be more themes that I haven't noticed, but these are the ones that I wanted to talk about the most. And right now we're gonna talk about Anzu as a character who is mean but kind. And part of what makes Anzu such an interesting character to enjoy is that it is so rare to see a character who is completely against love out of literal pettiness in a rom-com. And the reason love has not been in her life is purely because she was too oblivious and engulfed in her games, chocolate, and cat to notice or care. And throughout this season, we found out why Anzu's friends and eventual love interests like her so much. Despite this tough exterior she has, she's a very friendly, kind person who helps out people in any way she can. I mean, she literally goes out of her way to protect Tsukasa without even realizing it. She's grown to care about these people so much that she's willing to protect him from like a crazy stalker girl. And Girlie was crazy. I don't know if I'm going to be able to show the clip. Her life was being straight up threatened. Girlie was going to murder her. And she was just like, no, I'm going to stand up for him because he's my friend. And I was like, aww. But I was terrified. It like took a turn. That was crazy. So she stands up for people like crazy. She also stood up for her best friend. There was this moment where she was getting nasty rumors spread about her in one of the episodes because this guy didn't take it very well when she like rejected him. So instead he went the route of just like, oh yeah, she's totally into me, but I don't want her. And Anzu is one of the few people who actually stands up for her. It's nice to see a show where the character is actually kind and it's not just constantly being told at the audience. Not only is she really kind, but she's also really funny, especially when she's like avoiding romantic moments and her face goes like all masculine. Is that the right word? But I just think it's so funny. Right, let's rewind and go back to the butwhythough.net article, and we're gonna take what this article has said about Anzu, which I totally agree with, that Anzu is strong and determined, and that while she can be forceful and stubborn, she still focuses on other people's needs. Then the characters in Anzu's life are described as treating her as if she doesn't know what she wants or what she should be doing, which makes the narrative frustrating. I don't completely agree with this view, as there are only 3 things that live in Anzu's mind, and we can all guess what they are, so it makes sense that she would be treated like that considering she's also in high school and is like 16 years old or something, I'm guessing. I think as a society we're getting too used to the Teen Wolf, Pretty Little Liars treatment of teenagers where they're basically allowed to do whatever they want, and the parents also aren't there for the most part. I mean, they're kind of there, but they're not there. You know? I think we're too used to just letting teenagers do whatever they want. And I think realistically, it makes sense that people would be telling her what to do. I just think it's really weird that they are also teenagers, because like, who are you to tell her what to do? You're in the same situation. Well, maybe not. Some of them are a little more responsible than she is. The reason I don't agree with the whole Anzu not having any freedom in doing what she wants is that she is basically doing whatever she wants. She goes out whenever she wants. She got a part-time job out of boredom, and once video games were no longer a part of her life, she was able to hang out with her love interest. An article by Fiction Horizon mentions Anzu's 3 favorite things as well, and how these interests are usually linked to men more than they are to women. And we will come back to this later. But this review shows that while Anzu is happy without romance, this itself is not out of the ordinary, as lots of male protagonists start out this way too. And this show opens up the conversation over the social pressure women feel to have a romance compared to men, and she is literally forced to give up her desires and happiness in the name of romance. And this I agree with. Another article by NYU News also has a review about Romantic Killer, and Anzu is described there as relatable as she resists from falling in love. And this article claims that she strays from the typical feminine shojo image with the use of masculine faces in most of her reactions. And this review I find is the most balanced one because it gives a little bit of positivity but with some valid criticisms about the show. So the positives are that, the making fun of basic romantic tropes and their shallowness, the healthy friendships between men and women, and the clear boundaries Anzu has set in terms of her romantic suitors, and her not being indifferent to romantic attention, which makes her more relatable. And her basically not being the typical shoujo girl, where she's more masculine and she's not afraid to be unflattering or to have unflattering angles. But the valid criticisms that this article has is that the serious tone shift happens way too late. Another criticism about the show is that the idea of a friends to lovers trope is pushed, but she is seen not being interested in romance, so it's seen as forcing her into a friends to lovers trope. But another positive that the article doesn't mention is that while Anzu is somewhat shamed for her love of cat clothing and just cats in general, she doesn't hide that part of herself, and while she does, after Tsukaze's mall treatment, them going around the mall or whatever, she does start to dress more feminine, but she doesn't shame that either. She dresses more feminine, but she's still, to her core, loves cats, and that will never change. That leads me to another topic that I want to talk about, is Anzu's femininity. The way she's animated is absolutely hilarious, and I've only ever seen these types of face expressions on men, and the only exception I think is Kei Serunuma in Kiss Him Not Me, but she's technically not the love interest either, and also she doesn't want to be with any of her love interests. That's not the point. But it is nice to see Anzu not become overly feminine in order to develop as a character, but it's also nice that she doesn't shame being feminine either. And even when Tsukasa makes her wear clothes that don't have cats on them in order to go to the mall, she takes us on board but doesn't completely change. An article about femininity that I found, which I thought was interesting, is called Short Skirts and Superpowers: The Evolution of the Beautiful Fighting Girl by Catherine Henman. While this isn't completely relevant to the show that I'm talking about right now, it does show how femininity has been seen as empowering to women because there's less men and there's a range of strong female characters to choose on. This is from Sailor Moon. While I kind of agree with this take, I still think that a female character can be empowering even in a romantic comedy surrounded by men. Because why would you only need to be surrounded by women to be empowering? You can be empowering in all sorts of environments. One of the quotes that I liked was from page 54, and it's, "Although her heart is in the right place, Sailor Moon is scatterbrained and ditzy, often running late to school and forgetting her homework. She would rather play video games than study, and her primary concerns seem to be romance and eating dessert with her friends." And this seems to imply that her being ditzy is a weakness. It technically is, but I still think empowering characters can be flawed. Another article that I really liked was Shoujo Manga Research: The Legacy of Women Critics and Their Gender-Based Approach. And one of the quotes that I really enjoyed from that was, "Studies of shoujo manga, both in Japanese and English, particularly but not exclusively by female scholars, examine the genre as a subversion of patriarchal order which is assumed to limit young women to a state of powerlessness due to their fixation on female gender." And this article goes back to the point of femininity being shamed in order to make the female character seem more powerful. Because in the patriarchy, women are seen as less powerful. And while this series that we're looking at is a shoujo, is it a shoujo? I think it is actually. It is a shoujo. And while this series is a shoujo, it does not shame femininity. Now we're going to talk about using romantic tropes to convey shallowness. Now, of course, this is a rom-com, so there will obviously be the typical romantic tropes seen in anime, such as girl falling, and girl falling but this time being caught, and girl bumping into guy, except it's not a guy, it's a car, the usual. But these types of tropes are used in a more comedic way, obviously. After all, the point of this is that Anzu doesn't want to fall in love, so if these tropes actually succeeded, it would literally ruin the whole point of her character. The comedic use of these tropes also show how shallow they are, because people don't just fall in love by bumping into each other, or being left alone with each other, or watching a romantic movie. Love is built through getting to know each other and trusting each other. An article by The Decider has described the show as a reverse harem and a commentary by the creators on what women should do with her bodies due to Riri pushing Anzu to have a boyfriend due to a birthing crisis. While the person writing this does admit that there are some changes later on, this does not change their mind as women's bodily autonomy is challenged on a daily basis. Now, I kind of understand where this person's coming from. If you analyze the interactions between Riri and Anzu, and most of Anzu's very early interactions, that shows she has absolutely no interest in pursuing a man, and it does seem like Riri is forcing Anzu to get into a relationship. But a point that is missed here is the main reason why Anzu doesn't want to be with any of these love interests. First of all, she assumes that her fake childhood best friend is under Riri's control and does not actually like her. And second of all, she liked her life, and she even admits to herself that being surrounded by hot guys sounds great until she hears that her three favorite things will be taken away. Anzu's not anti-romance, she's anti-blackmail. Back to the Fiction Horizon article, it asks a good question. Do you have to give up the things you like, which don't fit into society, in order to be happy and in love? While Anzu does occasionally dress more feminine and build close bonds with the guys, she is still the same Anzu who misses her chocolate, her games, and her momohiki. Therefore, I don't completely agree with this idea that you have to act and do things in a certain way to function in society. Because Anzu was still loving her cats and her cat clothes, even when Tsukasa was trying to change her in some ways, but he still was falling in love with her despite all of that. So clearly you don't have to change in order to receive love. An article by Leisure Byte shows the shallowness behind the dating simulator and that you can't get real experiences from them. And it takes the most important part of the simulating scenarios, which is the connection that forms in young love and friendship. An important part of the series is holding off judgment as things are not what they seem. And this review clearly shows that the theme of friendship throughout the series, rather than the romance that is initially implied, is more important. The characters are shown initially as stereotypes, like the broody, quiet guy, the childhood best friend, and the cold prince. But they are each shown to be more than that, some more than others, obviously. But each of these characters, including Anzu, grow alongside each other, and that's the most important part of the series. Back to the NY News article, this states that this show makes fun of the most basic romantic tropes and shows how shallow they are. There is also the mention of the healthy friendship that is shown in the show between men and women, and the show eases into a friends to lovers situation, although it is obvious that Anzu has absolutely no interest in love. And she's honest about it too, with all the characters and the audience. As the season progresses, you can see Anzu growing to care for all of the love interests and even Riri. She prioritizes them and even goes out of her way to support them. This, however, doesn't change her lack of romantic feelings for them. For example, she bumps into a childhood friend of hers who also had a crush on her and who was jealous of Junta's glow up, and storms out of their old class's reunion. Despite Anzu not liking him, she still goes after him to comfort him and resolve the situation. The best example of this is the trust that grows between Anzu and Tsukasa. It's been hinted that Tsukasa has issues with trusting people, especially girls, and acts very cold to them in order for them to not get the wrong idea of him. But the seriousness of his situation takes you by surprise, as you don't expect this series to go from a comedic, fun rom-com satire to showing the idea of paranoia from being stalked. Tsukasa was previously stalked in his art school by a girl who he was polite to. She then became obsessed with him and went as far as sending gifts to his house in his mother's name, and even spiking him, breaking into his house, and faking his social media posts. Apart from a restraining order, nothing else could be done to help him, so he moved away and stopped posting pictures of himself. And turns out, it was because the girl's family has an uncle who like makes bad situations for the girl disappear. We learned that like way later into the series though. And unfortunately, because of someone taking a picture in the festival, she still found a way to get to him, regardless of how cautious he was. This situation, despite being awful, brought Anzu and Tsukasa much closer and allowed Tsukasa to finally let someone in and trust Anzu. This shows how love is built through small and big moments that bring people together. So this show was really interesting to watch and even more interesting to analyze. This season was left on a cliffhanger with that stalker girl basically getting her own wizard, which probably means very bad stuff for Tsukasa. That was an unexpected twist, and I really hope there's a season 2 to explore that. Also, a point that I missed was that Anzu's wizard Riri technically becomes one of the love interests because of how they protected Anzu during a time where she was in danger, and the wizard constantly went against the rules. So the company or whatever that the wizard works for decided that they should switch wizards and they would be punished. So Anzu made him become one of the love interests because that way they would still be closer and Riri would be safe. And it keeps showing that Anzu wants to help people. She's always about helping people. So yeah, I really hope there's a season 2. I hope you enjoyed this video. It is my first proper video after that one little video I did. Hopefully I don't mess up the audio as much in this one. But yeah, hope you enjoyed and see you all very soon.